The cold here is not the cold of Normandy. I know Normandy cold. It comes off the sea and it is wet, and it finds the joints first, the knees, the fingers. This cold comes off a plane that has no end, and it does not find joints. It finds the center of you, behind the sternum, and it does not leave. The fires are small tonight. He ordered them small. He does not want the Russians to count us by our light. I do not say his name the way the officers do, with the full weight of rank and reverence. I say it the way the men in the 3 Ligne say it, which is not a name at all, but a certainty, the way you say the sun will come up. He is there. He has looked at this ground for 3 days. He will use it. I have been with this regiment since Marengo. 5 years of roads. 5 years of boots through mud that smells the same in Italy as it smells here, in Moravia, on the night before something the men already sense will be worth surviving. The Sergeant Leger told me this afternoon that a man from the Punda battalion saw the Emperor ride the line at dusk, alone, and that the Emperor dismounted near the 3rd Company and spoke to a private by name. Leger told me this as if the story explained everything, as if a man being called by name by the Emperor solved the cold and the waiting and the arithmetic of what tomorrow would require. I handed Leger the regulation measure of brandy from the barrel. I did not tell him what I know, which is this. I have seen the Emperor ride the line before Marengo. I have seen the men he names and the way they look after, as if they have been touched by something that cannot be taken back. I have also seen what happens to those men in the advance. The touch does not protect them. Nothing protects them. I know this because my work is the hour after the advance, which is the hour no song is ever written about. I refilled the barrel at the supply wagon at 6 in the evening. Eau de vie, standard issue. The smell of it by now so familiar it is like breathing. I have poured it into more hands than I can count. I've learned not to look at the hands too long. Whether the knuckles are large or small, whether the nails are clean or black with powder, whether the fingers shake or do not shake. I have learned not to catalogue. I am not always successful. In the pocket of my coat against my left hip, there is a flask. Clay repaired at the base with copper wire. I wound myself at a forge in Milan in 1800. It holds perhaps 4 measures. I have carried it since Marengo, refilled it at every campaign. I do not drink from it. I have tried to explain this to myself, and I cannot. It is not sentiment. It is not luck. It is something that has no name, which is the most honest thing I own. The 3 Ligne goes up the Pratzen tomorrow. Soult IV Corps, the centre. The Pratzen Heights, a plateau that commands everything you can see from the valley of the Goldbach. He wants to take it from the Russians and Austrians before they understand what is happening to them. Soult IV Corps will advance into fog. The regiment will advance into fog. I will follow. This is what the contract says. Vivandière, auxiliary, 3 Régiment de la Ligne. Present during advance, services rendered immediately behind the engaged line, return to regimental baggage on order. Present. That word is doing a great deal of work. I know the men of the 3 Ligne the way you know a family you did not choose. Corporal Renaud, who has a wife in Lyon and a son he has not seen in 3 years, and who asks me every time we cross a river whether the Saône is as wide as this one. Private Berthet, who is 17 and joined at Boulogne and has never told anyone in the regiment that he cannot read, but I know it because he asked me twice last winter to tell him what his orders said. Sergeant Leger, who was at Hohenlinden in 1800 and does not speak of it, but sometimes during the interval between volleys, I have seen him move his lips without making a sound, and I do not ask. I have served them brandy before every engagement since Marengo, before Ulm, before the crossing of the Inn, tomorrow before Pratzen. The fire has gone low. I do not sleep before battles. I have tried. The body insists on being awake for what it already knows is coming, the way it insists on breathing before you fall into deep water. I checked the flask. The wire at the base is still tight. I put it back. The fog came up from the Goldbach before first light, and by the time the drums began it was so thick I could see perhaps 20 yards in any direction. The drums. I've heard them before enough engagements that they should mean nothing. They still mean everything. Not fear, not exactly, a recalibration. The body deciding what it is and what it is about to be asked to become. The 3 Ligne formed in column at 7:30. I was there, the barrel strapped across my back and the cup in my left hand. Standard dress, the blue coat of a vivandière, the colours of the regiment on the collar. Not a uniform, not exactly, but a declaration. I belong to this regiment. I follow this regiment. The record says so. Private Berthet found me in the fog and held out his tin cup, and I poured without being asked. He did not say anything. He was 17 and his hands did not shake, and I thought, as I have thought before, that this is worse than shaking. The ones who do not shake have not yet learned what to be afraid of. Tomorrow they will shake. If there is a tomorrow. I did not say this. Corporal Renault came in next. He said, "Is it cold where the Saône is, do you think, this morning?" He asks this every time. I said, "Yes, Renault, probably cold." He nodded as if I had confirmed something important and moved back to his place in the column. Sergeant Leger did not come for brandy. He was standing at the edge of the formation, looking into the fog, looking at where the plateau should be, where the fog had swallowed everything. I watched him for a moment. His lips were not moving. That was different. At Hohenlinden, I am told, the ground was covered in snow, and the bodies could not be retrieved for 2 days because the fighting continued around them. I do not know what Leger saw at Hohenlinden. I only know what I have seen of him since, which is a man who has converted something unbearable into silence and carries it as I carry the flask, without explanation. At 8 o'clock the order came. I heard it pass down the column, officer to sergeant to corporal, the words arriving reduced and clipped by the time they reached the rear. Advance, the Pratzen. Soult IV Corps moving. The drums changed. The fog. The regiment moved and I moved with it, behind the second company, the barrel shifting with each step. The ground underfoot was frozen, the grass stiff, the soil locked. My boots had been repaired at Brunn with leather that was too stiff, and the left heel had been cutting since yesterday morning, a friction that by now had become simply the condition of walking, the way noise becomes the condition of battle. You stop measuring it, it is simply there. We walked into the fog, and the fog swallowed us. The plateau rose ahead of us in the fog, and we could hear the Russians before we could see them. Cannon first, not the 3 Ligne's cannon, Russian 12-pounders from above, firing blind into the fog below them. The sound was not loud the way people who have not been near artillery think loud means. It was a pressure. It arrived in the chest before it arrived in the ears. It moved through the body at a frequency the body does not know how to refuse. The column kept moving. I kept pace. This is the discipline that no one writes into the contract, but that the contract assumes. The vivandière who breaks pace in an advance is useless. The brandy that arrives after the regiment has moved 300 yards ahead is brandy for men who no longer need it or can no longer use it. I keep pace. This is what I know how to do. The first volley came from the right flank, somewhere up on the plateau, and I heard the balls go through the air to my left. The sound of it, the quick, specific sound that you learn to identify and never forget, and never mistake for anything else. None of them struck at the column near me. I did not stop walking. The man in front of me stumbled on the frozen ground and caught himself. He was a private whose name I did not know from the 3rd Company. He looked back at me over his shoulder with an expression I recognized as surprise, the pure animal surprise of a body that expected to fall and did not. And then he looked ahead again and kept climbing. The fog began to thin. This was the moment I had heard the officers describe last night, speaking low near their fire, the moment when the fog Napoleon had waited for, the fog he had counted on to cover Soult's advance until the columns were already on the plateau, would lift. He had planned for this fog the way another man plans for artillery, used it like a weapon. And then it would lift, and the 3 Ligne would already be on the Pratzen, and it would be too late for the Russians to reform. The fog lifted, and the plateau was there, and the Russians were there, and for a moment, before anything happened, I could see everything. Lines of Russian infantry in grey coats, formed in double rank, the muskets at the shoulder, the officers with sabres raised. The ground between us was perhaps 60 yards, the grass brown and frost-flattened. A farmhouse to the north, its roof gone, burned at some point in the days before. The light was winter light, thin and directionless, the kind of light that makes everything look like a document. I stopped. The column did not stop. The 3 Ligne came up onto the plateau at the double and formed into line, the sergeants moving the men with the urgency of men who understand that 60 yards is the distance at which a brown bess ball travels in less than a second, and that the formation that is not formed when the volley comes will not survive it. Sergeant Leger was moving along the rear of the 2nd Company, placing men by shoulder, the flat efficiency of a man doing something he has done before, enough times that his body knows it without instructions from his mind. Private Bertet was in the line. I was behind it. The order to fire came, and the volley came, and the smoke came, and then I could not see any of them anymore. The smoke is a different country. I know this now. I have known it since Marengo, but you do not get used to it. You only learn its rules. Inside the smoke, there is no orientation. There is sound and pressure, and the smell of black powder and burnt wool, and the particular smell of blood on frozen ground, which is sharper than blood on warm ground. There is movement. There is no line. There are men. I moved through it, the barrel on my back, the cup in my hand, finding men by sound and by touch. A hand on my sleeve, a voice, not words, just sound. Private Fabvier from the 1st Company. who I knew by the scar on his jaw from a cartridge burst at Ulm. He was sitting on the ground, his musket across his knees. His right arm was held against his body at an angle that was wrong, not screaming. The men who are really hurt do not always scream. Sometimes they go very quiet, as if the body is conserving everything it has left for the work of surviving. I gave him eau de vie, the full measure. He took it with his left hand. I moved on. The second company was 15 yards ahead of me, in the smoke, pressing forward. I could hear them by the sound of the volleying, the rhythm of it. Load and fire, load and fire. The 90 seconds between volleys that the drill book calls the reload interval and that I call the counting. You learn to count the intervals. You learn what 90 seconds of silence means. A horse came through the smoke from the left at a gallop, riderless, the reins dragging, the eyes white. It passed within 3 yards of me, and I did not move. After Marengo, I learned not to move at cavalry sounds unless I could see what was making them. A horse that cannot see in smoke will run towards sound, and the sound that carries furthest in smoke is a human voice. I did not make a sound. It passed. I found Corporal Renault 20 yards further on. He was standing, which was good, but he was standing without his musket, which was not good. The musket was on the ground 3 feet away, and his right hand was pressed flat against the left side of his face, and the blood was coming between his fingers steadily. The way water comes between fingers. The way water always finds the gaps. He said, "Is it bad?" I looked at it. A grazing ball or a fragment of something. Long and not deep, but the cheek opens badly and bleeds as if it intends to drain the man entirely. Not fatal. Probably not fatal. I said, "No, Renault, not bad." He said, "The Saône floods in December. Did you know that?" I said I did not know that. I tore a strip from the cloth I carry for binding and pressed it to his face and told him to hold it and move to the rear and find the surgeon. And he nodded and moved. He believed me about the Saône. I do not know if the Saône floods in December. I do not know if he knew I did not know. I think sometimes that men in the smoke will believe whatever they are told about the world outside the smoke, because the smoke is the whole world and anything outside it is a kind of faith. By noon, the Pratzen was ours. I knew it not by any announcement, but by the way the columns stopped pressing forward and the sergeants began moving men laterally instead of ahead. The reorientation of a force that has taken ground and is now holding it. The smoke was still thick in the low areas, but on the plateau itself, the wind had begun to work on it, and you could see, in patches, the actual state of the morning. It was not a sight that requires description. Anyone who has read even a paragraph about Austerlitz knows what the Pratzen looked like after the assault. The figures in the casualty returns, the Russian and Austrian dead in their grey and white coats, the French dead in blue. I moved through it. This is also what the contract does not say, but assumes. After the advance, a vivandière is a particular kind of witness. She is not a combatant. She is not a surgeon, though she sometimes does surgery with her hands and her cloth and her brandy that the surgeons do not officially acknowledge. She is not an officer. She has no authority over anyone. She has only presence and the barrel and the knowledge of faces. Private Berthe was alive. I found him sitting with his back against a low stone wall near the edge of the plateau, the wall that the Russians had used as a fire position and that the 3 Ligne had taken at bayonet point. He was unhurt. His musket was still in his hands. He was looking at something in the middle distance, something I could not identify, and when I touched his shoulder, he looked up at me with the expression of a person who has just returned from a long distance in a very short time. I poured brandy. He drank it. He said nothing. This was different from the morning, when he had also said nothing, but that nothing had been the nothing of youth before experience, and this nothing was the nothing of something that had just been deposited in him that he did not yet know how to carry. I know the difference between them. 5 years of roads. I did not say anything either. I moved on. Sergeant Léger I found near the centre of the plateau, where the fighting had been thickest. He was standing over a Russian officer, not with threat or contempt, but with the look of a man examining something he recognizes. The Russian officer was dead, young, younger than Léger. His uniform was the green and white of the Novgorod Musketeer Regiment. His sword was still in its scabbard. He had died before he drew it, which means the volley came before he gave the order, which means something about how the charge had developed that I do not have the vocabulary to name precisely. Léger looked up when I came near. He took the cup without asking and drank, and handed it back. He said, "How many?" I said, "I have not counted yet." He said, "Favier is down. Renault is with the surgeons. The 3rd company lost its sergeant and 2 corporals in the first exchange." He said it the way a man recites inventory, because that is what it was. That is what it always is after the inventory. I said, "And you?" He said nothing. He looked at the Russian officer again. Then he looked away, at the horizon, at the enormous sky above Moravia, the winter sky that was beginning to clear now that the fog had burned off and the smoke was dispersing. The sky that was very large and very cold and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened beneath it this morning. His lips were moving. He did not know I could see them. They said he rode the plateau in the late afternoon, after the Allied rout was certain. I did not see him. The plateau by then was vast with movement, the work of aftermath, the surgeons and the camp followers, and the officers with their aides, and the prisoners in their long grey coats, moving westward under guard, and the supply wagons coming up the ground. The column had climbed that morning in fog. By afternoon it was busy in the way only a victory is busy. A defeat empties a field. A victory fills it. I walked the plateau until the light began to fail. I did not count. I had told Leger I had not counted yet, and this was true in the sense that I had not made a number. But the body counts anyway. The body keeps its own register. It does not show you the total until later, sometimes much later, sometimes in the middle of a night 6 months on a different road, in a different country, when you wake up and the number is simply there, complete, as if it had been calculated the whole time in a part of you that does not report. The 3 Ligne had taken the Pratzen. Soult IV Corps had broken the centre of the Allied line and the battle was decided by noon. Napoleon had used the fog. The regiment had lost 43 men in the assault and the fighting on the plateau. I learned this number from the adjutant's book at evening roll, when the clerks tallied the day and entered it, in their careful handwriting, into the record that would eventually become the official history of this battle. 43. I had served brandy to 9 men who were in that number before I knew they were in it. I did not learn this all at once. I learned it through the afternoon, each name arriving separately. Favier at the end, whose arm could not be saved. 2 men from the 2nd Company I knew by sight, but not by name. A drummer boy, 14 years old, whose name was in the register, but whose face I keep somewhere in the part of me that also keeps numbers. At dusk, I sat on the stone wall where I had found Bertha, and I took the flask from my pocket. The clay was cold. The wire at the base was still tight. I turned it in my hands, the way I have turned it since Marengo, since Milan in 1800, since the first time I wrapped the wire and understood that the cracked thing could still hold what it was supposed to hold. I did not open it. I put it back. The fires were large tonight. He permitted them large because there was no longer any need for concealment. The victory was in every fire. The men of the 3 Ligne gathered around them, and there was talking, and there was some singing, and there was the kind of warmth that comes after cold, that is not only the warmth of fire, but the warmth of having been in something together and being still alive on the other side of it. I sat at the edge of the fire nearest the 2nd Company. Corporal Renaud was there, his cheek bound in white cloth, the cloth already marked. He was talking to the man beside him about the Saône, explaining the flooding, the particular geography of it, the exact villages affected, with the precision of a man who has just been allowed to think about something other than this plain, this fog, this plateau, for the first time in 2 days. The man beside him was listening, or appeared to be listening, which in the firelight and the relief of the evening was probably enough. Private Bertet was there. He had said very little since the plateau. He sat close to the fire and held his cup in both hands and stared at the flames. He was still 17. He would be 17 for 3 more months. I thought about what he would do with what had been deposited in him today, how he would carry it, whether he would carry it the way Leger carried Hohenlinden, folded and compressed and converted into silence, or whether he would carry it some other way that I could not yet see. I thought about the drummer boy whose name is in the register. I thought about Favier's arm. I thought about Leger and the Russian officer and the lips moving. Sergeant Leger was not at the fire. I looked for him and did not find him. He had been at the evening roll, his name recorded, present. But he was not at the fire. I found him later, at the edge of the camp, where the light did not reach, standing facing north in the direction of the plateau. Not looking at it, not that I could tell, just standing, the way a man stands when he is not performing standing for anyone, when he is simply in a body on a field after a thing has happened, and he is still alive, and the man at Hohenlinden is still not. I did not approach. Some presences should not be interrupted. I went back to the fire. The record will say this: the Battle of Austerlitz, 10 December 1805. The Grande Armée under Napoleon I defeated the combined forces of the Russian Empire and the Austrian Empire. The Pratzen Heights were seized by Soult IV Corps in the morning assault. The Allied centre collapsed. The battle concluded with one of the most complete tactical victories in the history of warfare. French casualties, approximately 9,000. Allied casualties, approximately 36,000, including prisoners. The record will say this, and it will be true. It will not say what Private Berthet looked like in the smoke when I touched his shoulder. It will not say what Corporal Renaud said about the Saône. It will not say what Sergeant Leger was doing at the edge of the camp when the fires were large and the men were singing. It will not say what I was doing on the plateau when the names came in one by one. It will not say that I sat at the fire until the singing stopped and the men slept and the fires went low, and that when the camp was quiet, I took the flask from my pocket one more time. The clay, the copper wire at the base, still tight, wrapped by my own hands in Milan in 1800, after Marengo, in a forge that smelled of iron and charcoal, and the particular smell of a city that had just been fought over and returned to living. I had been 22 at Marengo. I did not open the flask. I held it until the metal of the wire was warm from my hand, and then I put it back. The fires went to coals. The plain was quiet. In the morning, the 3A Ligne would move again, toward Brunn, toward the armistice, toward whatever came after a battle that would be named by the men who write the names of battles, for 3 emperors who had been in the same field on the same day, which was the kind of thing that happened once in a century, and that the men of the second company, sleeping now around the coals, had been inside of without knowing exactly how to hold that fact, except that they had held it, and they were still here, and tomorrow they would march. I would march with them. This is what the contract says. Present.